What's up guys, Rotozep here, and today, after playing turn-based for a little over a month now, I think is how long it's been out, I've come to notice that there are some consistent mistakes that I've been making and that I'm sure other people have been making as well, and I've kind of rounded them up to 5 just general things that I can talk about today. So hopefully by exposing these mistakes and stuff and talking about how we can fix them, it will help you guys play better and it will help minimize your misplays, because you know, it's hard to tell sometimes why you lose a game, but it can be because you've just been making small misplays throughout the entire game that have just added up into you being at the disadvantage or you losing the game. So hopefully with this video, it'll shed some light on those and help you guys out in your playing. So the very first point I have is not getting a new hand if you're going second on the first turn of the game. So because of the weird mechanics of turn-based, just because of how they coded it in the game, you are currently able to get a new hand if you wanted to, if you're going second on the very first turn of the game. So how it works is your opponent gets to take their turn first and you're waiting. So every card that you see that you know is not going to be relevant for the matchup, that you know you just don't need, you can discard it. And then when your opponent's turn is done, it cycles into your turn. You'll notice that your hand is full again. So all the cards that you discarded have been replaced, and you're left with any of the ones that you wanted to keep. So this isn't one that, again, is going to make or break a game for you, but it is a very nice thing to take advantage of if you're going second, because you can almost just about guarantee that you're going to have a decent starting hand from going second, which that's a good advantage to have, so why not take advantage of it, right? So our next 2 mistakes are kind of related to each other, but a little bit different, so I figured they'd be separate talking points. And of course, the next one that I'm going to be talking about is discarding on your off turn. So discarding on your off turn is something that, I don't know, like I've turned it into a game to like how fast can I get rid of things on my off turn. It's not a great practice, yeah, and it's definitely burned me a couple times because, you know, I'm not just discarding everything. I'm discarding things that I feel like, okay, in the following turn or in the following couple turns, I'm not going to need this card. I'm going to discard it. So that's kind of my thinking behind it. But until you actually know what your opponent did on your turn, you can't really rule out things. And I've had situations before. It's been like a handful of times where I didn't expect them to do something. They did it, and I threw away the card that I needed to counter them. Like, take for example, let's say I really didn't expect to get an overtime from a death because I didn't expect a bone dragon or something, right? So I throw away my triage, and then they bone dragon me, and it's like, oh, well, crap. I just threw away my triage and I have to redig for it, and yikes. So, you know, that's kind of why you don't want to do that. So a general guideline for what cards you can be discarding on your off turn: off-school dispels, non-relevant set shields, and hyphen or apostrophe, whatever the hell, stun blocks. Because here's the thing, like if you're going up against a myth and you already have stun blocks on, you might want to make sure you have at least 1 stun block left in your deck, because it's not uncommon for myth to try and, I guess, stun you out of those stun blocks and then re-stun you and chain stun you or whatever. It's a mess. So if you're going up against myth, you should probably keep your stun blocks around, or at least maybe just know that you have 1 left in deck somewhere. But as far as other schools go, as long as you have stun blocks on, I think it's a pretty safe discard to get rid of them. So yeah, but of course, if you're going up against myth, all that goes out the window. You should make sure that even if you have 2 stun blocks on, you always should have at least 1 more set of stun blocks, because you never know. Myth is kind of wild with it. They do love chain stunning. And of course, related to this, but also slightly different, is our next point, which is going to be overdrawing from your TC. So let's say you're a real flagrant offender and you just do both things, right? You not only are discarding things rapidly and too many things, but then you're overdrawing in your side deck on your off turn. Okay, this is bad. This is bad practice. And overdrawing out of TC has, like, that's not a new problem. That's always been a thing. But I feel like especially in this current meta with turn-based, it's just more of a pressure, because there is a pressure on you to discard things, because there really is an advantage to being able to select the card on your turn as fast as possible, because you don't give your opponent the opportunity to look at their hand. So there is real merit in trying to play out your turn as quickly as possible. But of course, we get too trigger happy with it, we get a little too giddy, and we discard things that we don't need, or we overdraw inside because we're looking for something that maybe isn't as important as we thought it would be, and it just clunks up your hand, right? And that is a real misplay that can cause you to lose a game in the long term, because your side's all full of hits and stuff typically, and if you're looking for a support card or something that's only in your main and you've overdrawn out of your side, you gotta wait a little bit before you can start drawing out of main again, which of course can be a problem. So try and avoid doing this. The little tips or whatever, like if you have to get rid of over half your hand, like you're discarding so many things out of your hand because you're looking for one specific card in your side, there is no reason you should be going over half the cards in your hand unless like it is a dire situation kind of thing, like you just got a fat overtime on you and you need triage, or you absolutely have to pull a shield or else you lose the game. Situations like that. That's where it's appropriate to draw inside, because you're doing something in order just to prevent you from outright losing. And if it comes down to a situation where, oh, is this going to bite me in the butt later versus I need this now or I lose, obviously go for broke, right? You want to go for the thing that's going to prevent you from automatically losing, but just be careful about when you're drawing out of TC or sides or whatever. And keep in mind too that like just because you're not finding the optimal hit doesn't mean that you can't find another hit that will do just the same, or at least kind of supplement that until you can get your other combo going, right? So I think that a common mistake is like people will be like, okay, I need this particular hit, so they'll be drawing in TC or whatever, overdrawing, and they won't get it, or maybe they do get it, but now their hand is all clunked and they could have probably just used something else that they had in their hand previously and just kind of waited on pulling that right card. So don't go crazy with the draws because you feel like you need something when you might not really need it when it comes to a hit. So, and of course there's always exceptions for that, but generally speaking, I think people are too trigger happy to do things like use shadow spells and stuff. Like they see an opponent with no shield, oh, it's free real estate, time to use a shadow pip, and they just go off trying to draw for their shadow hits, but it's not always necessary, so just keep that in mind. All right, now our fourth mistake is going to be playing too passive. So because of how turn-based works and each player gets to take their turn completely independently of the other, it's very, very common. I know for me, maybe you guys don't have this problem. I know that this is a problem I have, especially on characters like my balance, where they're way more tanky than a traditional character, so I try to keep that defense going so that I'm not taking any damage. But it's very common I've been seeing for people to just play too passively, and that's a problem, right? There's a reason why this meta has such a focus on high health. Your gear is supposed to be set up so that you can take an open hit from something. You should be able to kind of bite the bullet and take an open hit from something like a shadow hit or just a high pip spell or something. I don't know, right? But it's very common for people to just want to constantly be shielding, and if they're ever not shielded, they put up a shield, and that's playing too passive, right? Because again, your opponent can, if you're playing too passive, your opponent just goes into Shrike and blows you the hell up, because jading is not a thing in 1v1 ranked right now. I mean, I guess it is, like it's a niche thing that life can do, but for the most part, like Shrike is able to beat those kinds of players, and if you're doing some kind of turtling strategy, Shrike usually is going to be able to counter you completely. So yeah, you don't want to play too passively, like, and know that you have some resistance and you do have a lot of health, so you should be able to take some form of hit from your opponent. And sometimes it's not always smart to do that. Like sometimes there really is merit in shielding because you don't want to take a certain hit, but other times, you can't just get afraid to take any open hit and to just constantly be shielding, because if you're not doing damage, you're not winning the game. That's just how it is. So you want to make sure that you're kind of playing a decent balance of both offense and shielding, and playing more defensive cards. If you guys are wondering, just like, well, how do we figure out, like, how do we know when we can take an open shot or not? When it comes to things like fire or ice or schools like that, you know, you just got to ask yourself, like, am I willing to take an open FFA right now, or am I willing to take an open a bomb? Is that going to be a problem for me? Like, because you should generally know how much these spells are going to do to you. That's part of your gear setup. That's part of preparation for the arena, is knowing how hard spells are going to hit you. So if it's the beginning of the game and it's not like, again, going to just completely make you lose the game if you take an open shot, yeah, you can probably do that and then capitalize off the fact that you're not being defensive and kind of, you know, get a counter-strike offense going against them. Because, again, if you're purposely choosing to not be defensive, that means you're mounting an offense, and that means you're working towards the kill. So I guess another good way of looking at it would be like, am I going to hit this person harder than they hit me? You know, if by playing more offensively, I can either secure the game or I'm just going to have a higher damage output than them, then it's probably worth it, right? And I think if we're talking like that, like higher damage output, think of it in terms of percentages, not health, right? Because every school has different amounts of health. So if you're Storm going up against an Ice, well, obviously the Storm's going to have a higher damage output if we're talking like raw numbers. But what you really need to ask is, like, how much percentage of my health is an Abominable Weaver going to do versus how much a Rusalka is going to do to them. So think in terms of percentages, right? And yeah, that's really all I have to say about playing passive. You want to find a good, healthy mix of doing damage, but also keeping yourself shielded and defended properly. Alright guys, we made it to our last point here, our last talking point. The last mistake that you might be making is misplaying the school matchup. So it's no secret that every school matchup is different, and there's subtle nuance to every single matchup. Like Ice versus Fire is a very different matchup than Ice versus Balance, for example, right? And you need to know this, right? When you're playing on a school, you gotta know this. And I guess like there are some like basic tips I can give you guys, but for the most part, it's things from finding out from playing, right? For example, big mistake on a lot of people's parts is, maybe Balance is the exception. I think Balance can typically get away with having a minion up, but even that's kind of risky, right? But don't put a minion up against like a Death Wizard, for example, because most of them pack Call of Cthulhu or whatever, and that's going to be a huge chunk of their health back because it's going to do a crap ton of damage to your minion. So yeah, that's never good. And for that one death out there that still plays Vampire, they can also Vampire your minion. So using minions against death has like never really been a great idea throughout the years, but especially now, especially with Shadow Pips and stuff, if you are in the level range where that's applicable. This wasn't supposed to be like a max level specific guide, but you know, at lower levels they definitely do play Vampire, so that is a lot more relevant there. But I'm specifically thinking of things like Call of Cthulhu, where you're literally handing them the game because they're healing for a ludicrous amount back. They're doing a lot of damage to you. Never good stuff, right? And then of course there's just other things like not using auras against a Balance, like just kind of like common sense things that you gotta really understand, because there's stuff that like no matter what school you're playing on, you shouldn't do against certain schools. And then there's kind of like school specific things, right? Like Fire versus Fire. You never really want to let your opponent King Art you into something, or there's like a lot of Fire versus Fire is a weird matchup because there's a lot of hijinks that go on with Dispels and Fiery Giants and Ifrit chaining and just really weird stuff. So it's kind of like you just have to play the games better to understand that. But I think once you understand better how the matchups play out and school specific things to avoid, you're going to win a lot more games, because that subtle nuance is the difference between a good player and a great player. And that subtle nuance, again, could give you the edge to win a game. It could kind of counter out any luck your opponent's having, like Shadow Pip wise. So it just gives you the upper hand. So that's really all I've got to say. That's my 5 talking points. I don't really know how long this video ended up being. It's probably going to be long knowing me. But yeah, I hope this video helps you guys out. I hope that maybe you saw some stuff in here that you're like, oh, geez, I do that a lot, you know? And I'm sure there's one person out there that's like, this didn't help me at all. What the hell? But if it did help you, be sure to let me know. And as usual, I'll be answering any questions you guys have in my comment section. And Am I like the whiz PvP god? Of course not. But these are just things that I've noticed from playing a lot on turn-based that I've been doing wrong, right? I just know I'm doing these things wrong. So I figure I can make a video about my mistakes and maybe what your mistakes are too, and kind of talk about how we can fix them, right? So that's all I really got to say, guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and Rotozap out. Peace.